Buenas.
Hi, how are you? I'm Nicolas Camera. I work for the development and research team of GeneXus, and I'm also part of the web team. In the web team, we've been working hard to improve the interoperability of this with other technologies, especially user control 0.0 and external objects. I want to show you the results of our work with our Angular generator in an application that is not common to see developed with GeneXus. At the end of this presentation, you will also be able to make this type of application. The case I will talk about is called GeneXus Next. GeneXus Next is an application whose front end was done using our Angular generator. To understand how GeneXus Next was built or created, I'll tell you how it started initially. I remember I was in the office, and a fellow worker called me to his office. He said, "Look at this, the designs of a web application." Sorry. Before, let me tell you how it was born. But I want to share, you probably all saw it, but for those of you who haven't seen it, I want to show you what GeneXus Next is today, and then I will tell you about its origin. So, if you have not seen it yet, we have logged in, we have this configuration, we have examples to see the many applications we can generate, and then we have a field where we can provide the description of the back office information we want to generate. We send the field, and the assistant will give us an answer with a structured model of the application. Here we have a screen with two sections. It's more structured. In both parts, we can change the visibility, just the chart, divided view, or just the structure. We can collapse the sections. We have accordions where we can work faster in the content. We can have direct access with the right bar. And we have the modeling reader where we can edit, delete, or add new fields in our model for that application. Then, under the section, we can choose the templates. Then we can also click F5 and recover the whole status of that application. And we can iterate on the model through the chat. So once we have created and adjusted our application, it will show us the configuration, and we can confirm this back office. Once we confirm, we go to the details of the project. We see the state in real time, how it progresses, and we also get a summary of what the contents of the application are, the templates, and we can see all the applications created, as well as the one we are creating in real time. This is the status of the project, and this summarizes how GeneXus Next works in the large scale. Now I would like to tell you how it was made with the Angular generator. This is what I said in the beginning. One day I was in my office, and a colleague asked me to visit his office to watch the designs of a web application that was done for two variables, for a web desktop and for a web mobile. He asked me, "What do you think about this web application? Can we do it with the Angular generator?" I said, "Yes, it looks simple. Let us start working." And since then, we created GeneXus Next. That web application was the GeneXus Next. We started development at that point, and a week later it was released in production with the two variants we see, the web desktop and the web mobile. When it was released, it already had two means of authentication, and we could do a complete cycle of creating an application with natural language. In the beginning, we would write a description of the application, click 2 or 3 buttons, and in a matter of minutes, we had created our back office application. At that point, GeneXus Next was a traditional GeneXus application. It didn't have much UI, and it had been done from a Figma design from scratch. And this version already had a lot of details, interesting patterns that I would like to share with you so that you can also use them in your applications. The first pattern, which was mentioned today, is the use of master panel. This object allowed us to reuse parts that were common to the application, which was like the outside of several screens. The master panel was for the header and footer of many of the screens. We also had a pattern that was the use of User Controls 2.0. User Control 2.0 is an object that allows us to add new controls to build and design the layout of our applications. The user control provides a new tool, a new way to develop applications. And these objects, if they need to be defined, you define two sections. One is a properties section, where properties, events, and all that is part of the user controls interface. And then the screen template section, where you define the template of the user control. This is what is being rendered in the random. So at that time, we were using some user controls to somehow enrich the experience of the application. For example, we had a user control for a spinner, a very simple one. The interface was craft property. It was used with to provide style to the spinner, and then it was a part of HTML to have that kind of behavior for the spinner. So these are the two big things that the version already had in these design patterns that helped us move on. And when we released that first version, we started analyzing what was next, what we wanted next. So we looked at what was built, and we found a problem in what has to do with the style of the application. At that time, that first version of GeneXus Next had an object that had like 1,000 lines in terms of style, very huge. So it's very difficult to maintain. If we want to modify something in a panel, it was very difficult to find the styles associated to a control. So we started improving that, and we partitioned that single object into smaller ones. In particular, we had one design system associated to each panel. Apart from facilitating the maintenance of the whole style in the application, helped us realize about styles that could be reused and bring to other more general design systems. So with this scheme, we imported the design systems that we see at the right and turned them into one, where we have the whole application, and it's much clearer which style was associated to which panel. This helped us a lot in developing this product, and we recommend this to you, especially for these applications that are so big. So the design system should be done by panels. So at that point, we had already received feedback from the first version, and we started planning the next version of GeneXus Next. We thought that was probably the greatest challenge, to add the possibility of doing iterations on that model. In the first version of GeneXus Next, once you described the application, you could not do iterative actions. So in the second version, we added 2 components that allowed you to do iterations on the model in different ways. One was the one at the left, the chat. We wanted to chat with the assistant so as to iterate on that model we were building for the back office application. And on the right, we have a structured editor that allowed us to visualize the model, and in addition, as we saw in the demo, we could edit, delete, and add new fields into the model. So this screen presented the greatest challenge in the second version of GeneXus Next, and it defined it at the time. All difficulties lied on that screen. So given that requirement, we started analyzing the possibility of using an angular generator, and we realized it was possible to build that screen. So I will tell you how we were able to create this screen and what were the patterns or considerations we took into account. Before we move on, these patterns that I will refer to were used in the following versions of GeneXus Next, because we were clear about the avenue to take and how to evolve GeneXus Next. So now I will separate the screen into sections to show you what we did in each section. First, we have the header, the rollout menu. We used a drop-down control, and we did that specifically for that menu. Then we had the main section of the screen, which was a tabber control with the captions inverted. And to do so, we used the GX properties of the GX stand position with button value to invert the content and the caption. Then on the right, the chat had a grid control with control type equal grid properties to give it that behavior. The prompt that we had at the bottom was a variable attribute control with control type edit, and the associated rule was long part chat. Now moving to the right, that structured editor that we saw were in fact 2 things. One accordion, which was done through a user control 2.0 with a slot. In the slot, we put the content that was shown when we expanded the accordion.
That content included the modeling editor, what we saw in the demo, to visualize the entire model and add new fields. That modeling editor was also made with user control 0. The most important part of this screen of GeneXus Next, perhaps you've already seen the trend already, but we are using some user controls 2.0 to design this screen. Why? Well, as we've said, user controls 2.0 has an additional flexibility because we can include new behaviors or extract repetitive behaviors in new controls that we can use later on to design the layout of the screens. Now, although we could have made several screens and several sections with traditional GeneXus without using user controls, we decided to use user controls because we had an additional flexibility with properties, events, and methods. We can solve problems in a more accurate manner. And therefore, we decided to use user controls 2.0 to solve the most complex problems. Now, the idea then is to come down and see how we made this user controls 2.0, because unlike the ones I told you at the beginning, these were more particular and were made with another methodology. It can be summed up in this diagram. The user control 2.0 that we saw in the previous screen wasn't in the KB of GeneXus Next, but it was in an external repository that we made. So it can be said that these user controls were like a third-party implementation, but we did it. So what we did to implement those user controls was to implement them in a repository using other technologies and processes. Particularly, we use WebConfig to experiment with user controls. And then what we did was to have a version of that repository using the package administrator, and we would publish it from GeneXus KB and then be able to consume those user controls. I'm going to explain some how we went about it. So what have we got in GeneXus Next? Well, we used to have several objects of GeneXus control, of user control, and with small syntaxes, it would show the dependence to that repository. The repository was the place where we implemented the complex part of the controls. Now, the user controls of GeneXus Next were just an interface and a mapping of the web conference. Apart from decoupling, this implementation allowed us not only to use these user controls that we made for GeneXus Next, but also in other KBs, because after all, the way of using it was declared through a dependency. We were saying the implementation of controls are here, and we use it in the package control of Angular. So we can not only do that, but if tomorrow we want to update those controls, then we can update them in the repository, make any necessary changes in that external repository, version it with npm, and it was as simple as in the GeneXus Next KB, update the version of these controls once, and they would be fully updated and ready to work. Obviously, provided there are no large changes in the interface of the controls. So that was somehow the development scheme of that part. And this is what we continue to use in all along GeneXus Next to solve those problems that were a bit complicated and that could be solved in a more effective manner with user controls. Now, what I'd like to show you now, what about that syntax? What was it that we were writing to declare that dependency of repositories? And it was something very simple. I'm not going to go into specific details now, but what we did was basically know the name of the repository, its version, and where was the loader for those controls. And so we would declare that in only one user control, and all user controls 2.0 had those dependencies, and they could use them. So we could use all the controls of that external repository as if we had done it in our user control 2.0. Just to give you an example, this is what it looked like. We declared the name of the repository, the version, where the loader was located. And that was enough to implement all the user controls 2.0 that we had in that external repository. I'm going to go down one step, and this is a technical talk, so I have to show you something else. But I want to show you how we made those user controls. It was very easy using this pattern. To give you an example, let's see the accordion and all the modeling. That's going to be a monster. So this is the accordion that was as simple as defining the properties, their interface, whether it was expanded, the title of the accordion, what to use for title. And then there were three scripts. These scripts were only used to implement the method. Once you drag the user control in accordion, could be used in the GeneXus events. So that was the interface of the accordion. Then we had the screen template. It was just using that web conference that we had in the external repository with the properties we defined in the interface. So it was handing over that information, and it was in that way we were reducing the screen template. I've marked how we mark that block that we do in GeneXus with that user control. The content is shown when the accordion was expanded. That was the only thing that we implemented in KB of GeneXus to make that accordion work, just that. Now, the implementation was in that external repository. And now we have the case of the data modeling. We repeat that. We declare the properties, we declare the events, and that was the interface of the modeling, of the editor modeling. But the way of implementing it was to have all the properties of the web modeling, and that was everything we did for user control 2.0 of that editor. We could do, we could delete, we could implement that. And in GeneXus, this was a CDT, that data modeling. It was all those possibilities. It was as simple as going to the web component. Then that would interact with the user and events. It would return the updated model, and everything was working. So we would edit those thing in GeneXus, and we would call the corresponding services. So all that complexity that we've seen was reduced to this in GeneXus. So this was very complicated, one of the most complicated things that we've done in GeneXus. Perhaps this is very simple as we show it. So what is then the idea of all this? Thanks to this pattern of user controls. Well, this pattern that I've just shown you of user controls allows us to continue focusing on GeneXus, to make simple and very abstract applications, and the more complex parts can be designed in an external repository with other technologies and other processes. And then the way of integrating that dependency, those controls in GeneXus, is very simple. It's the syntaxes that I've shown you and the way of integrating user controls, and everything is working. You needn't do anything else with GeneXus. The advantage is that all those things are decoupled, so we can make the controls when we want it, we version them, and we update them. This is thanks to all the effort we've done with the Angular generator to improve the interoperability of controls. This, in fact, allows us to unblock, develop apps such as GeneXus Next. This pattern based on user controls using GeneXus for the more complicated parts of the app allows us to unblock the possibility of making these apps in a very simple way with GeneXus. So what we would like you to take back home from this talk is that User Controls 2.0 gives us this possibility of making these apps with Angular generator. So last, what can we expect in the future? Well, the Angular generator is something we continue working with. We want to improve development with User Controls 2.0 so that it's easier. And what can we expect from the future? Well, improvements to facilitate that interoperability that we've seen with GeneXus, Angular, and User Controls 2.0. That's what we would like to do, because this unblocks the possibility of making this type of apps, which seem very complex in UX, but in GeneXus, they continue being simple to implement. So that's our idea for the future with the Angular generator, and continue progressing in interoperability so that it becomes more and more simple to make this type of applications with this pattern that I've shown you of User Control 2.0. I also recommend a couple of talks from our colleagues in the afternoon who are also going to tell you how you can make Angular apps of other types. That is the end. Thank you.
Okay.